Hey guys, Professor Bill of Comic Book University, and I'm going to be doing a spotlight on story for the first appearance of Captain Marvel. So this is Carol Danvers, and yes, this is, if there's any kind of a spoiler, I don't know how, just whatever, the end credit scene, there's a scene that depicts for the Avengers Infinity War movie that just came out at the time that I'm doing this. Had to completely reverse my plans of what I was going to do for this spotlight on story, and I last minute did this, so don't expect miracles in this one. But the end credit scene was to show Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. So yeah, she's had a lot of names: Binary, Warbird, you name it. The powers that Rogue has, besides her mutant absorption powers, all those other powers are Carol Danvers. So make sure you check out Carol Danvers Explained in a Minute, Captain Marvel Explained in a Minute. Either one should work in the YouTube type bar, either way. Basically, guys, we're going to go way back, way back. Marvel Superheroes, issue number 12. This was the first appearance of Captain Mar-vell. He is a Kree warrior who had come very recently in the pages of Fantastic Four, where we're looking at like issue number, I think it was 46 and 47, if I'm remembering correctly. A sentry had appeared there, and this sentry, this is a Kree device. It is an extremely ridiculously powerful robotic sentient being. They're responsible for guarding the Inhumans way back in the day. Just there's a lot of story there, and the Kree made these to be an incredible machine to protect or destroy whatever, but usually to protect a specific area. It's very rare to find someone who could stop one, especially like one-on-one, almost impossible. So it's one of the reasons why it made Mar-vell so amazing. So now Mar-vell appeared in this issue, and this issue, mind you, Marvel Superheroes, issue number 12, this was his first appearance, and it was a short story about him first arriving on Earth, his girlfriend Una, this jerk named Jan Rog, who was his superior officer, excuse me, and a bunch of other, I don't know, retainer guys, whatever. And they were supposed to have a landing party to infiltrate Earth, but Jan Rog had a different idea. Says, I'm going to send you by yourself, Mar-vell, because I want to keep your girl here and I want to try and convince her to be with me instead of you. Okay, he was a little more subtle about that, but seriously, not that much more subtle. Anyway, so this guy, just appears down there. Now you might be saying, we were talking about Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, right? Okay. In the next issue of Marvel Superheroes, that's issue number 13, Carol Danvers makes her first appearance. Now, she is an amazing character who she started off as the head of security for this top government project like NASA, something along those lines, the U.S. Air Force. She was top of the line. And she met a lot of resistance because there was a lot of chauvinism there. This character, mind you, from the beginning, from her inception, was meant to be that breakout character who kind of broke through the glass ceiling. So she had a lot of weight on her, and a lot of people giving her a hard time, from the male side. But she was still respected, and it was said, even though the people didn't like her, they're like, well, she is the best, at what she does. She is the best security guard, or this not just security guard, head of security. It's like, oh, thank you for that, but you're still a jerk because such and such. So, it's cool. Way back in the day, dude. So, anyway, she through multiple incidents, she's supposed to be trying to, and mind you, it's just these first two issues, the issue number 12 and 13 respectively of Marvel Superheroes, and then it right away went to its own title. Marvel Superheroes was a title that it was not even really so much of an omnibus. It had this one new story in it for these two issues, these two stories, but then it had a whole bunch of repeat issues from the Golden Age. You know what I'm saying? So an old Captain America, an old Human Torch, an old Submariner story, an old Black Marvel story, for crying out loud. Like, they had some serious old characters. The original Vision was in one of them. Like, they weren't joking. So anyway, it moved to its own title, a full title, and it lasted, 68, I don't know, it lasted forever. Okay, it lasted forever, the Captain Marvel story. Anyway, that was mar-vell, and the Kree soldier who eventually would die, and we'll get to that. We will get to the death of Captain Marvel. In the meantime, Carol Danvers is just a regular human, and she's very exceptional, but she is still a regular human. And she did have to be rescued a lot, and she was never happy with that. She was never particularly cool with that, but she did develop a crush on mar-vell. She never figured out his secret identity was as a scientist who was supposed to infiltrate everything, and he wound up becoming a good guy through happenstance. It's funny, if Yon-Rogg didn't betray him and try and steal his girl, then none of this would have happened. He would have probably still been a bad guy the whole time, but is what it is. Anyway, in around issue number 11, I think it was issue number 11, that's when Una actually died. It was an accident, but it was through the fault of Yon-Rogg indirectly. Yeah, he didn't actually pull the trigger on her, but he might as well have. It was totally his fault. So, by Captain Marvel, issue number 18. Oof, going way back. By issue 18, he got his new costume. So he started looking like, the red and the blue and the yellow and all that good stuff. And, okay, this was a later issue by issue 16? Issue 16, 17, 18. That's when, issue 16, 17, 18. That's when he actually got the new costume. When he'd gotten the new costume, he'd also gotten the negabands. This was through the Kree Supreme Intelligence, and Rick Jones wound up coming across the other end of the negabands, I should say. So Captain Marvel would be trapped in the negative zone with a protective shell around him, whatever. But then when Rick Jones would take the negabands and, as hard as he could, bang them together, all of a sudden, bang, he would switch places, he would switch atoms with Captain Mar-vell. So Rick would be in that protective shell, but he would always be freaked out, so it would have to be for a very short time. He was just a regular human. He would get extremely, nervous, like, oh my God, there are things going all over the place. So yeah, it was scary. Anyway, so with all of this happening, Una had died some time ago. He got over it, but he still wanted revenge against Yon-Rogg. So at one point, Yon-Rogg finds it's supposed to be the ultimate Kree device, the Psyche Magnetron. Now, this thing basically makes your wildest dreams come true, essentially. Your thoughts, it manifests them into reality. So he makes this being called the Mandroid. Now, this is not the Mandroid that you know from like Project Pegasus and S.H.I.E.L.D. wound up using them for a long time. It's not that bodysuit. It's just a big, gigantic robot thing that's really tough. Anyway, so Captain Marvel defeated all these bad guys before they defeated a Sentry. Defeated this guy, the Mandroid, defeated all these different threats that were put in front of him. But he always wanted to get his hands on Yon-Rogg. So eventually he was able to get through this Mandroid, and the way he was able to do it was to get it to shoot at the Psyche Magnetron to begin with. So it shorted out his power, but it also wound up causing an explosion and a burst of radiation as well. He had the choice, Captain Mar-vell had the choice to save either Yon-Rogg or Carol Danvers. Those were the only two people down there with him, besides him. So of course he's going to save her. So he grabs her and turns her, and now we don't get to see this in these comics, all right? We just kind of see she eventually fades from the storyline for the most part. But then later on, in the Miss Marvel, MS period Marvel comic book, she gets her own comic book. See, she was originally created so that she'd be a strong woman. But by this time, Marvel was like, okay, listen, we really want a strong female superhero. We've got a couple of, good, strong superheroes, whatever, but we need them started from the beginning, like Wasp and what's her name, Susan Storm. They were fashion designers and models and things like that. And they hung out. The Fantastic Four actually had Millie the model hanging out with them and everything. So it wasn't particularly progressive. You know what I'm saying? And Marvel's always been very progressive. So when they started getting all the different heroes in and trying to get representation all over the place, it wasn't like the modern day of Marvel around 2017, where all of a sudden we get a massive influx of people, and they're taking on the identities of other characters. So, you know, I'm not particularly interested in the whole Comicsgate movement. I've actually made a video where I can agree with some of the things they say, but 100% disagree with the way that it's actually presented. And I don't want to get into that now. Just do a search, a YouTube search if you choose, for discussion. My take on, I think it was like my take on Comicsgate. Anyway, so as far as here's concerned, way back in the day, they did it pretty well. They didn't overload the area. They didn't try to massively change the landscape. What they did was, am I going to die making this video? What they did was they took a key player and entered this key player on the battlefield. You know what I'm saying? So you'd have, oh, hey, you know what? We could use a really good, strong black hero, and they've never really worked for very long in the past, but those companies weren't big enough to really, you know, keep him going. So let's make a black hero. Oh, hey, let's make T'Challa. You know what I'm saying? Oh, he's an African hero. He's awesome. Okay, let's put him there. Much later on, you know what? We can use an African-American hero. Let's do the Falcon. Hey, you know what? Let's try this again. Let's do Luke Cage. You know what I'm saying? Hey, you know what? It would be cool to have an Asian character. So let's put on Shang-Chi, right? So they would do this once in a while. And Miss Marvel, originally she was called Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, she was going to be the female that they put up, and from the beginning she was going to be extremely strong. She made friends with Mary Jane in the very first issue of Miss Marvel, and that's volume 1, of course. And even though Mary Jane was pretty successful, you know, not particularly, but pretty successful as a model, budding actress, all that good stuff, this, you know, Carol Danvers, she had something entirely different going on. She had all this reputation for being a colonel. I think she got up to a maximum of colonel before in the U.S. Air Force. She managed to get to, she was a spy, you know, for the longest time. And her ability to overcome interrogation actually, and escape from her interrogators, allowed her to be brought into the Air Force intelligence department, which is pretty wild. She became the chief of security for NASA and all that good stuff. And then she wound up becoming a writer. She was fired. The reason why she was fired was because her job was actually to capture Captain Mar-vell, and she couldn't. He's a superhero. She's not. What are you going to do? So anyway, she got fired, and then she went off on her own to, she became a writer to write about her stories. And she wrote very interesting stories, and it was only for about a year, but then J. Jonah Jameson hired her at the Bugle to write a women's magazine called Women. I know. She actually became the editor-in-chief of the editor or editor-in-chief, I forget. But anyway, she was an editor of high renown. She was pretty much in charge of the magazine. Only J. Jonah was above her. And she had a much stronger personality than him. She, you know, he tried to argue this price. It was actually like $20,000, you know, per year, and she argued $30,000. And while he kept trying to change negotiation tactics, she stood firm. That was kind of cool. You know what I'm saying? She showed that Peter Parker is always going to get pushed around by Jameson, but she won't be. And that was cool. That was cool. They gave her a certain level of strength. She had a confidence that Mary Jane didn't have. Mary Jane looked up to her, saw her as a woman of influence, a woman of power. And it's like, wow, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're just so interesting. Most interesting woman alive, I guess, you know? And the thing is, she didn't realize that she was also Miss Marvel. Now, when she was saved from the Psyche Magnetron, Captain Marvel was able to protect her from the blast, but the radiation still seeped through. Now, one of the things that, like I said, that this thing really does, this Psyche Magnetron, is it manifests your psyche into reality, you know, the things that you want. So with this radiation going through, one of the things that she wanted was to be superpowered. So, excuse me, oh, for crying out loud, I'm dying here. Anyway, the radiation bombarding through him and getting to her, it actually took some of his, like a replica, so it didn't detract from him at all, but it took the replica of some of his DNA and imbued it into her. So she was considered half Kree, half human. In reality, most of the stories I've read, she was a quarter Kree and the rest human. But her DNA was radically changed, so she is no longer full human. that's an interesting mutation, like not even a mutation, it's almost like a DNA implant. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's interesting. So she had the massively elevated strength. She didn't have any of the weaknesses. Originally, the Kree, Captain Marvel himself, he had to take a diluted potion so that he could breathe regular air once an hour. You know what I'm saying? Once an hour, he had to take this potion so he could breathe our air. But he was several times stronger and a lot more durable than your average human. His negabands obviously gave him very different powers, and he had different powers as he went on, but the negabands were his final power. What she wound up developing is the super strength and the super durability. And mind you, she didn't realize this happened. She went to like a coma for a little, coma-like state for a while, and every so often she would have these after 6 months of this, she would start realizing that she was having blackouts, and when she blacked out, she would become Miss Marvel. Now, that actually was shown later on to be a manifestation of her molecular control power. She has very minor molecular control powers. At first, she just simply has the ability to, she's stronger than most people. She's stronger than, like, let's say the Scorpion. She knocked out some of his teeth in a fight. They've had a couple of fights. And she was also able to resist damage. Now, she could fly, but they try to explain that through X-ray tech. They were able to realize that she had a harness on her underneath her costume that allowed her to fly. It was like a web harness. That was retconned not too long into it, that she was able to fly herself. Mind you, that was actually kind of a big deal. You think about it, Marvel back in the day, how many characters could actually fly? Like, off the top of my head, I'm thinking Thor, I'm thinking the Human Torch. You know what I'm saying? How many Marvel characters were actually able to fly back then? Seriously, not a whole lot. Iron Man, through what he did, right? But, and the Wasp, she could do her little flight with her little wings when she, shrunk down to, you know what I'm saying? So, So, her being able to fly was actually a pretty big deal at the time. And it turned out that she was actually able to fly on her own. She didn't need that web harness thing. She had molecular control, so she could actually change the composition of her costume at will. And she was able to unlock more of her powers, be stronger. And eventually she did develop the ability to absorb energy and to make herself more powerful like that. And she could also fire bolts of energy, pure concussive force, or actual like stinging energy, like not electrical energy, but like a regular energy blast, non-concussive. She could do this through her fists, her hands, or her fingertips. And she's done all of them. So energy projection. But she wound up developing all sorts of different powers as she went on. Now, again, she would have these blackouts and she would become Miss Marvel, because one of her powers is actually this thing called a seventh sense. Not like a sixth sense where she can read thoughts, but it's a very minor form of cosmic awareness. Less so like Karnak from the Inhumans, more so like Peter Parker, Spider-Man. She has a spider sense, so to speak. She could tell when she was in trouble, when somebody was going to attack her from behind. She could also tell if some of her friends or coworkers were hurt. She was able to tell that, down the street, J. Jonah Jameson was kidnapped by the Scorpion. It's like, what? So that would sometimes cause her blackouts, and then she would turn into Miss Marvel, and neither of them realized each other was each other. And it was when she did go under hypnosis for a short period of time. I think it was issue 3 or 4 that happened of Miss Marvel. But the doctor realized something about her. Plus, she also had a blackout because of the stress of, he tried to say, oh, no, no progress. He just thought that she was crazy but didn't want to say anything. So then she kind of blacks out right there and changes it to Miss Marvel right in front of him. So that was interesting. And but she wound up going back to the same place. She was fighting this monster in the same place where the Psyche Magnetron was, the destroyed Psyche Magnetron. So while she was down there, she had enough memories come back to her, enough flashbacks, so she's like, oh my God, I'm actually Carol Danvers. And then Carol Danvers would eventually remember also, oh wow, I'm really Miss Marvel. So boom, and it all eventually came into place. It's one of those things where they're very slowly trying to formulate. They have this idea for what the character is supposed to be, but not how the character is going to necessarily have the powers or be whatever. They're trying to make something edgy. When they get to the point where they're like, okay, it's silly to keep on doing this whole I don't know each other is each other thing. Let's just make her her. So it's an evolution, you know what I'm saying, when fan feedback comes in and all that good stuff. So it was an interesting ride. It was a very interesting ride. She was always made from the inception to be very strong. She was not meant to be afraid. She was definitely not made to be unsure of herself. She was always very sure of herself. So this is why, you know, like Wonder Woman was like that also. And realistically, Captain Marvel, this Carol Danvers, she was made to be the answer to Wonder Woman. So, you know, with that in mind, just giving her slightly different powers. In fact, in the first issue, when she's beaten up on some thugs before she actually tangles with the Scorpion, somebody turns around and says, "Oh man, what the heck is her name? I know her name. The actress who played Wonder Woman in the TV show, Linda Carter." It's like, oh wow, Linda Carter's got nothing on her. There you go. They're purposely trying to make that reference. So interesting, and I dug it. I dug it. It was done well. It was done right. It wasn't just something where they just took a bunch of different things and just threw a bunch of things on the wall. No, they actually went with a character and said, let's see if this works out. If it didn't work out, I'm sure they tried something else. Hey, they went with the She-Hulk, right? And they went with a couple other characters like that, but they just wanted to go with a character and start her off from scratch, a character who already existed, and then make her into what she is. Bobby Morse, Mockingbird, was another very similar character to that. Started off as a scientist. They decided to promote her to a SHIELD agent, like field agent, and then actually she became a superhero. And interesting, with no powers, mind you. So I like when they do characters like that. I like when they actually put some thought into it. And that's pretty much the origin of Miss Marvel. Everything after that, eventually she would go on to an absolutely horrible storyline where she became pregnant with her own son by her own son. Yeah, it's weird. It's a time loop, freaky kind of thing. Anyway, Marcus Immortus, just look it up. Or don't. She and her fellow Avengers kind of abandoned her at that point. It's like, well, we know that she's mind controlled, but she seems happy. Wow, really? She never let them live it down, which was cool. That was a good redeeming moment. And then she would lose her powers to Rogue. She would wind up becoming Warbird, or excuse me, I think she became Binary first. Then she would later on become Warbird. And then she eventually decided to take the mantle of Captain Marvel. It wasn't being used, and Marvel didn't want to lose the licensing rights, so she took the name Captain Marvel. Anyway, guys, that's going to be it for me. Got a whole bunch of good stuff for her original stuff, Masterworks and everything down below, both physical copies and, what do you call it, the digital copies, so digital and actual copies that can be mailed to you. And now is a good time to grab them because a lot of the stuff is on sale because of the Infinity War movie. That being said, go out and see Infinity War again. I know I will. All right, guys, that's going to be it for me. Hope you enjoyed it. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.